It was November 20th, 1947. Westminster Abbey holds 2,000 guests, and the strange thing about a royal wedding staged in a broke, rationed, bomb-scared country is how many of those guests arrive as the leftovers of a vanished world. Exiled kings, queens without countries, princes whose palaces had become embassies or rubble. Princess Elizabeth, heir to the British throne, walks the aisle to marry a tall naval officer named Philip, and the whole ceremony runs like a national exhale after 6 years of war. By blood, 3 people belonged in those pews and never received an invitation. Philip's 3 sisters, Margarita, Theodora, and Sophie. The women who had helped raise him after his own family scattered across Europe like dropped cutlery. Why? Each of them had married a German prince, and several of those husbands carried documented service to the Nazi regime. One of them's inside the SS. So in the autumn of 1947, with the wreckage of London still being cleared, and the memory of the Blitz fresh enough to taste, inviting them became politically impossible. Philip's mother, Princess Alice, attended in the gray habit of the religious order she had founded. His sisters stayed in Germany and read about the wedding in the newspapers. One question most retellings skip straight past. Who decided that? Who drew up the guest list, drew the line through it, and ruled which of the groom's own blood relatives counted as acceptable company for a future queen and which did not? The answer points, at least partly, toward a woman who would spend the next 55 years being painted in tabloid headlines and television dramas as the person who hated Prince Philip more than anyone alive. Queen Elizabeth, wife of King George VI, soon to be the Queen Mother. That is the story everyone assumes they already know. On one side, the warm, gin-loving, corgi-adjacent national grandmother. On the other, the blunt, modernizing, foreign-born consort. The two of them locked in 5 decades of cold, smiling warfare conducted across dinner tables and grouse moors. It plays beautifully on screen, and it rests almost entirely on one badly chosen word: hatred. To understand why the British court studied Philip the way a butler studies mud on a clean carpet, you have to understand where he came from. He was born in 1921 on a kitchen table on the island of Corfu, Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, which sounds grand, until you learn that within 18 months the Greek monarchy collapsed, soldiers arrested his father and nearly shot him, and the whole family fled into exile aboard a British warship. Baby Philip traveled out of Greece in a cot improvised from an orange crate, which makes the future husband of the Queen of England quite literally a refugee packed in fruit packaging. A childhood with no fixed address and no real family unit followed. His father drifted to the south of France, to card games and a mistress, while his mother, Princess Alice, suffered a psychiatric breakdown severe enough that doctors diagnosed schizophrenia and committed her to a Swiss sanatorium for years, removed from her children for long stretches. By the time Philip turned 10, his parents had quietly dissolved as a couple without ever bothering to divorce. His sisters were married off into German nobility, and Philip himself bounced between relatives, countries, and schools, raised in large part by his Mountbatten uncles and his grandmother in England. He owned almost nothing, no private income, no inheritance, no property, no settled nationality at all until Britain finally naturalized him as a subject in 1947, the same year as the wedding. One often repeated story has him turning up for family visits carrying a single battered suitcase. His schooling tells the same scattered story. A few years at an American-style school near Paris, then Cheam in England, then, briefly, Schulschloss Salem in Germany, the school run by the family of his brother-in-law, Berthold of Baden. The rise of the Nazis forced the educator Kurt Hahn, a Jewish reformer, out of the country. Hahn resettled in Scotland and founded Gordonstown, so Philip followed him there, finishing his education on a cold Spartan campus on the Moray coast that drilled with freezing showers, hard runs, and relentless self-reliance. Philip carried a real German chapter in his past, and his enemies at the British court never let the memory of it fade. Now run that biography through the imagination of the British aristocracy in the 1940s, a class that treated ancestry like a credit score and foreignness like a faint bad smell. They did not see a brave self-made survivor. They saw instability, a young man with German brothers-in-law, a mother in a religious habit who had once lived inside an asylum, a father who had died in a Monte Carlo hotel room, leaving behind little more than a signet ring and a clothes brush. The very things that, viewed today, make Philip sympathetic, struck the Old Guard in 1946 as exactly the things to fear. And the Old Guard answered to a head of household. Her name, Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth, born Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, did not count as foreign and never let a single person forget it. Her people were old Scottish aristocracy, the Strathmores, rooted in centuries of British and Scottish soil. She had married the second son of George V, a shy man with a stammer, a prince expected to live and die well clear of the throne. Then his older brother, Edward Fye, threw the crown away for an American divorcee in 1936, and the stammering second son became King George VI, whether he wanted the job or not. Elizabeth never forgave Edward for it. In her own total conviction, Abdication had loaded a frightened, unwilling man with a burden that wore him down for the rest of his life. So, when she studied her daughter's choice of husband, she brought no neutral eye to it. She had already watched the monarchy nearly destroyed once by a brother-in-law who put his own desire above the institution and walked away from the throne, and she had no intention of standing by while it happened twice. Caution in her mind was simple maternal duty. Philip ticked several alarming boxes for that court. He had been born foreign and raised penniless. He could be blunt to the point of rudeness. His nearest relatives carried restless ambition, and his sisters tied him by marriage to the recent enemy. To a palace that prized a soft, deferential charm he read as abrasive, even arrogant. The famous slur enters the story right here, and most retellings get it badly wrong. Popular history, along with several glossy television dramas, will tell you flatly that the Queen Mother looked at her daughter's fiancé and called him the Hun, a phrase soaked in wartime poison and perfect for building a villain. Except the problem is simple. Archival evidence puts no such word anywhere near her mouth. The term the Hun and the phrase the German boy did circulate inside the Queen's wider circle. They are documented. But they trace most clearly to her brother, David Bowes-Lyon, a man known for a sharp tongue and a snob's instincts, and to other courtiers writing in their private diaries. What biographers can genuinely pin to Elizabeth herself runs quieter and in its own way more revealing. Her private nickname for Philip, the Battenberg. Battenberg had been the original family name of the Mountbattens before they anglicized it during the First World War to bury the German sound of it. By calling Philip the Battenberg, Elizabeth did not scream wartime hatred across a room. She did something cooler and far more aristocratic. The nickname filed him. It reminded everyone within earshot exactly which family he really came from, exactly how recently that family had needed to hide its name, and exactly how far down the ladder he sat compared to a daughter of the Strathmores. None of that adds up to hatred, it adds up to snobbery. And inside the insular British upper class of the 1940s, snobbery toward a penniless foreign prince worked less like a private feeling than like a competitive sport played openly for status. Did she try to block the marriage outright? Tabloids have long claimed she schemed to pair Elizabeth off with a parade of safe English dukes' sons, but no solid primary evidence supports any organized blocking campaign. What the record does support runs a good deal less cinematic. The king and queen simply asked their daughter to wait until she felt certain, and they sent her off on a long royal tour of South Africa in 1947, half hoping that distance and time would quietly test whether the attachment could hold. It held. Elizabeth had settled on Philip when she was 13, had carried his photograph through the war years, and would not change her mind to sue the dinner table. Her parents read the situation correctly, gave way, and the wedding proceeded. But notice the result. The Queen Mother lost this round. Her future son-in-law entered the family through the engagement she had quietly hoped to slow, and he entered already aware of every cold little name used behind his back. The relationship started in a deficit, and no wedding cake would lift it out of that hole. For about 5 years, the story almost looks peaceful. Almost. The wedding itself in November 1947 landed as a genuine national event. A burst of color and ceremony inside a country still living under ration books. Philip surrendered his foreign titles, took the style of Duke of Edinburgh, converted formally to the Church of England, and emerged, on paper, as a fully assembled British prince. King George VI, whatever the wider court murmured, had grown fond of his son-in-law and trusted him. The bond between the king and Philip, by most accounts, worked. The young couple's best years arrived far from London, on the island of Malta, where Philip served as a Royal Navy officer between 1949 and 1951. Elizabeth joined him for long stretches, and for a brief, strange window, she lived something close to an ordinary officer's wife's life, driving her own car, visiting the hairdresser, dancing at parties, existing as a person rather than an institution in waiting. People who knew her then described her as visibly happier than at almost any later point of her life. Philip, meanwhile, thrived in the career he had chosen and excelled at. He earned his own command, the frigate HMS Magpie, on pure merit, and he ran the ship hard. He wanted that life. A naval career earned and entirely his own, with a wife who happened to be a princess, rather than a princess who happened to own a husband. It did not survive contact with reality. King George VI's health collapsed through 1951, his strength visibly draining, while the public received a softer story than the truth. As the king weakened, Elizabeth and Philip found themselves pulled back to London and into the machinery of monarchy, standing in for the dying man at engagement after engagement. Philip's naval career did not close with a decision or a ceremony. It simply stopped, swallowed whole by duty, and he never sailed in command again. Philip turned 30 that year. By the time the king died in February 1952, he had already lost the profession he loved, the independence he prized, and the one arena where he had succeeded entirely on his own terms, with no help from his Mountbatten relatives or anyone else. Whatever resentment Philip later carried into his dealings with the Queen Mother did not arrive out of nowhere. He had paid a steep entrance fee to that family, and its senior matriarch would soon make sure he understood his exact place inside it. February 6, 1952. King George VI, the shy man the Abdication had turned into a wartime monarch, died in his sleep at Sandringham. Lung cancer, decades of heavy smoking, and the sheer grinding stress of a job he never wanted. His daughter Elizabeth, 25, was up a tree in a Kenyan game lodge watching wildlife when, somewhere in the night and without a single witness to the exact moment, she became Queen of the United Kingdom. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon had become a widow at 51, stripped of the role that had defined her entire adult life. She had not merely lost a husband. She had lost her job, her home, her standing as the first woman in the kingdom, and the partnership that had carried both of them through the war. For months, she withdrew almost completely, retreating to Scotland, and genuine worries circulated that she might never return to public life at all. Then came the fight. While the Queen Mother grieved up in Scotland, a dynastic argument detonated inside the family over a question that sounds almost trivial and ran anything but. What exactly would the new royal family now be called? Enter Lord Louis Mountbatten, Philip's uncle, a man charming, brilliant, spectacularly ambitious, and never knowingly underconfident. Mountbatten had effectively project-managed Philip's whole path into the royal family, from his naturalization to his English schooling to, many believed, the marriage itself. And now, with his nephew's wife on the throne, he announced at a dinner party that the House of Mountbatten reigned over Britain. He should have kept that thought to himself. Word of the boast traveled fast straight to two women who found it intolerable. Old Queen Mary, Elizabeth II's grandmother and widow of George V, a stickler for dynastic propriety, had personally lived through the family's name change during the First World War. The Queen Mother stood right beside her. Both treated the idea of a House of Mountbatten as something close to a hijacking. Their reasoning ran deeper than pure snobbery, though snobbery sat firmly in the mix. Back in 1917, George V had created the House of Windsor itself, scrubbing away the embarrassing German Saxe-Coburg-Gotha name at the precise moment German bombs fell on London. To the two women, the Windsor name belonged to George VI's inheritance, the dead king's final gift to his daughter. Letting an ambitious in-law paint his own surname over it within weeks of the funeral felt like grave robbing. So the Queen Mother and Queen Mary did something quietly devastating. They turned to the politicians. They drew in Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who needed no encouragement at all to distrust Lord Mountbatten, and Churchill brought the full weight of the cabinet down on the question. In April 1952, the matter reached the cabinet table, and the decision came back hard and fast. The royal house would remain the House of Windsor. Mountbatten's claim died on arrival. For Philip, the decision turned into a humiliation with his name stamped on it. Literally. His wife wore the crown. His children would one day inherit the earth, and yet his own surname would not pass down to a single one of them. He did not take it gracefully, and honestly, why would he? His friend and equerry, Mike Parker, later recalled the reaction in words that have trailed Philip ever since. The complaint that he amounted to nothing but a bloody amoeba. The only man in the entire country forbidden from giving his name to his own children. That line gets quoted endlessly, and it deserves a small footnote. Historians point out that Philip pressed the complaint hardest around 1960, during later negotiations that eventually produced the hyphenated Mountbatten-Windsor name for descendants. But the wound opened in 1952, and the people who had poured salt into it stayed perfectly identifiable. One culprit sat in the cabinet, another shared the family's own dinner table. A grieving, formidable mother-in-law who had just demonstrated in the clearest possible terms that when she chose to move against him, she could reach all the way into Downing Street. Philip learned something permanent that year. The Queen Mother was no sentimental old lady to be humored and patted on the hand. She operated as a political force in her own right. A woman with a 5-decade memory, friends in every room that mattered, and a total willingness to use both. None of this ran on one woman's personal grudge. Hostility toward the Mountbatten influence reached right through the senior establishment, a whole machine of institutional suspicion, and the Queen Mother operated as just one powerful actor inside it. Look at the men around the throne. Sir Alan Lascelles, private secretary first to two kings and then to the young Elizabeth II herself, distrusted Mountbatten so deeply that he poured the suspicion straight into his private diaries. Jock Colville, Churchill's private secretary, shared the feeling, and these men did not gossip idly. They formed the permanent professional class that ran the monarchy as an institution, and they had reached a settled collective verdict. Lord Mountbatten ranked as too ambitious, too fond of the limelight, too willing to spend his royal connections pushing his own agenda. The risk seemed obvious. Letting a man like that near the controls of a brand new reign struck the establishment as a genuine danger. Those diaries belonged to the courtiers, not to the Queen Mother. When a historian quotes Lascelles fuming about Mountbatten, the quotation proves only what the court establishment thought, not what ran through the Queen Mother's own private mind. She stood with that establishment, reinforced it, and used it. All true. But her inner monologue does not survive on paper anywhere, and pretending otherwise is simply bad history, dressed up as insight. What we can say comes out plain enough. The Queen Mother and the palace machine wanted the same outcome, and they secured it. A young queen insulated from radical change through her first vulnerable years. George VI's arrangements treated as sacred. The Mountbatten ambition contained. On every count, they succeeded. Philip spent the 1950s discovering exactly how thoroughly they had boxed him in. His wife adored him. The system around his wife did not trust him. Sorting out which of those forces counted as the Queen Mother, and which counted simply as the court remains the single hardest job in telling this story honestly. And anyone who tells it with total confidence is selling you something. Once the name fight settled, the conflict did not end. It simply changed shape. Through the 1950s and 1960s, the friction between Philip and the Queen Mother stopped circling around surnames and turned into something deeper and much harder to fix. It became an argument about what a monarchy should look like, what it should cost, and how it should feel in the second half of the 20th century. Start with the practical side, since the practical side turns genuinely funny if you squint. After the accession, the Queen handed Philip the running of the private royal estates, Sandringham and Balmoral. Nobody mistook these for symbolic gifts. They were working agricultural estates with staff, budgets, and decades of accumulated comfortable inefficiency. Philip walked in like a naval officer inspecting a sloppy ship. He cut staff numbers, modernized the farms, installed new systems, questioned old traditions, and asked repeatedly the most dangerous question anyone can put to a royal household. Why do we do it this way? The Queen Mother loathed that question. To her, the answer to why do we do it this way rang perfectly self-evident. We do it this way because it has always been done this way, and the doing of it precisely that way, with the footmen and the ceremony and the excess intact, is the entire point of the exercise. She built her own world as a kind of living rebuttal. After leaving Buckingham Palace, she settled into Clarence House and Royal Lodge and ran them in a style that had basically stopped existing everywhere else in Britain. Footmen, a large household staff, long lavish lunches, fine wine, fresh flowers by the bucket. An Edwardian rhythm of life preserved like a fly in amber while the rest of the country queued for buses. It cost a fortune. She ran up heavy overdrafts, and the Queen quietly covered them year after year. Telling the nation's beloved widowed mother to economize attracted no volunteers. One concrete clash captures the gap. When the question arose of whether to allow television cameras inside Westminster Abbey for the 1953 coronation, Philip, who chaired the Coronation Commission, pushed hard for letting the cameras in. The old guard, Churchill among them, recoiled at the thought of the sacred moment beamed into ordinary living rooms. Philip won that round, and roughly 27 million Britons watched the coronation on television, many of them on sets bought specially for the occasion. It previewed his whole argument in a single afternoon. A monarchy that let people in would survive. A monarchy that hid itself away would not. The Queen Mother never openly fought the broadcast, but the instinct behind the resistance, the conviction that mystery worked as the monarchy's armor, belonged squarely to her. This is the point where the tabloid version overreaches all over again. The dramatic telling locks Philip and the Queen Mother into a daily turf war, the two of them snarling across the same breakfast table morning after morning. The geography alone kills that picture. They never shared a house at all. Philip operated out of Buckingham Palace and the estates, while the Queen Mother kept her own separate establishments at Clarence House and Royal Lodge. What they actually had ran quieter and deeper than any shouting match, an argument of ideas. Philip believed the monarchy had to visibly change, trim its costs, shed its dead weight, and prove its usefulness to a modern democratic country, or it would not survive the century. The Queen Mother believed almost the precise opposite. To her mind, the monarchy's power lived exactly in its refusal to behave like everything else. Strip away the footmen, the ceremony, the deliberate glittering excess, and what remained amounted to an ordinary wealthy family. And an ordinary wealthy family could be voted into irrelevance. Two intelligent people, one institution, and two completely incompatible theories of how to keep it alive. Neither of them lacked brains, which explains exactly why neither of them ever backed down. Philip argued for the world rushing toward them. The Queen Mother defended the world that had built her. The gilded Edwardian childhood, the certainty, the deference, the unspoken assumption that some people simply arrive in life standing on a higher floor than everyone else. She would not dismantle any of that for a son-in-law with a clipboard and strong opinions about staffing levels. So if the disagreement ran real, and it did, why did the whole thing never explode into open warfare and a permanently fractured family? The answer is almost boring. Both of these people operated, above everything else in their lives, as disciplined professionals. And professionals do not air the family's private business in front of the help. From roughly the 1970s onward, the public never glimpsed a crack. Not at Trooping the Color, not at Christmas at Sandringham, not at state banquets and family weddings and christenings. Philip and the Queen Mother performed as a smooth, united front. They sat together, joked together, and shared one trait that genuinely connected them across every ideological gap: a dry, fast, slightly wicked sense of humor. Witnesses from inside the household described the pair constantly trading sharp little jokes, very often at the expense of whatever pompous official or stiff courtier had just walked out of the room. But here the paper trail dies. We can see the behavior, we cannot see into the hearts. Whether that later warmth ran genuine and settled, or whether it amounted to two seasoned operators who had simply concluded that decades of frost served, no one, no diary or document can prove. People who knew them both came down on different sides of it. What stays beyond doubt is the behavior itself, and the behavior changed. Whatever the temperature underneath, both of them reached a durable, deliberate choice. The dignity of the crown outranked their private disagreements. The young queen, the woman they had quietly fought over back in 1952, had become the fixed point both of them organized their lives around, and neither would hand the press a feud to feed on. That counts as no small thing. In its own unglamorous way, it might rank as the most genuinely royal thing either of them ever managed. They did not have to like each other's vision of the monarchy at all. They simply had to protect the monarch herself. And for 30 unbroken years without a single public failure, that is exactly what both of them did. So, did the Queen Mother hate Prince Philip? Somewhat, yes, but not really. The record holds no letter of loathing, no diary of contempt, no scene of cruelty, nothing that earns the word. What it holds instead carries 3 plainer names: snobbery toward his broke foreign background, a widowed mother's weariness in the dangerous months after the king died, and a real fight over who would shape the future of the monarchy. So we end roughly where we began, at that 1947 wedding, with 3 empty spaces where Philip's sisters should have sat. Hatred did not empty those seats. Politics emptied them, and snobbery, and the cold arithmetic of what a bruised post-war nation would tolerate, and a court with the Queen Mother near its center that had ruled which parts of Philip counted as acceptable, and which parts had to wait outside in the cold. Philip spent his first years inside that family being measured, filed, and quietly contained by his mother-in-law. He spent the next 50 outlasting every bit of it. When she finally died, in March 2002, at 101 years old, half a century after the husband whose memory she had guarded so fiercely, the penniless boy from the orange crate, the man she had once filed away as the Battenberg, still stood exactly where she had never quite wanted him. At the dead center of the House of Windsor, the name she had fought Downing Street itself to protect. He would have appreciated the irony of that, and by every reliable account, so would she. Tell me in the comments which detail changed the way you see this relationship. Was it the 3 empty seats at the wedding? Was it the nickname she gave him? Was it the name fight that reached all the way to Downing Street? Or was it the fact that when she died at 101, the man she had once filed away as the Battenberg still stood at the dead center of the house she had fought to protect? I read every single comment, subscribed to the Royal Thread. Every story is connected. And the next thread is already being pulled.